Hey guys, Fox here, and today it's time to talk about the Super Draft. Yes, the UFL Super Draft has officially happened earlier today. I have all the picks here for you today. This is a full draft recap. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell to be notified as soon as I upload any videos, as I've got a ton of content coming out in the next few days. So, without further ado, let's get right on into it. With the first overall pick in the Super Draft, the San Antonio Brahmas selected quarterback Quentin Dormade of the Orlando Guardians. This is a big one. This is a very controversial pick to some people, as some people really didn't like Dormany and a lot of other people really loved him. The bottom line is I think he is a very solid quarterback. Now, this draft, we ended up seeing very few quarterbacks being taken, and so this one was a slight shock seeing him go first overall. He was a very solid quarterback in the limited time he had, as he only played in 7 of the 10 games for the Guardians, and he put up, overall, counting stat-wise, very solid numbers to where I don't really get all the hate he got. Is he as good as some of the elite quarterbacks? Definitely not. But considering the fact that other teams, mainly teams like the Panthers and Battlehawks, needed a quarterback in this draft and they didn't get one, this is a pretty big deal. When you consider the fact that he was third in completion percentage, he wasn't really high up there in interceptions, yet he did have a decent amount of TDs. This is a very solid pick for the Brahmas, who had a very lackluster dispersal draft. Really great pick. Then with the second overall pick, the Memphis Showboats selected Jared Thomas from Northwestern. Well, he played for the Breakers. You'll notice that just like the dispersal draft, a ton of the players the Showboats drafted were Breakers. Their head coach, much like with Wade Phillips going to the Brahmas, formerly was on the Breakers and now is here in Memphis. And so both those teams took a lot of guys from their former teams. Jared Thomas going second overall was a bit of a surprise seeing him go that high, but he's a very solid off center. Good pick for the Showboats. Then we have one of the biggest surprises of the entire draft, and that's Ezra Gray going third overall to the Roughnecks. If you were watching the UFL media's recap of this draft or their live reaction, man, Ace was just insane about this. This is an insanely weird pick. Is Ezra Gray a guy that has a lot of potential? For sure. He can be a great running back. But we are talking about the Roughnecks. They have Mark Thompson, who is by far the best running back in the UFL. Getting him as a backup, this is a big one. They already have TJ Pledger. This is going to be one that we'll really have to see if it works out. This is a really bold pick, especially when Reggie Corbin was available, even though, surprised, he didn't actually get drafted. So we'll see. Then fourth overall, we have Drayvon Askew-Henry, a safety from the Battlehawks. He ended up having 30 tackles this past season in the USFL with the Generals, and now has gone to the Battlehawks. Very solid addition to the back end. The Battlehawks wanted to start by getting their defense shore up. Solid pick. Then we have Nate Brooks, cornerback from the Birmingham Stallions, going to the Michigan Panthers. The Stallions had a lot of guys that went unprotected that they ended up drafting in this one. I feel like this is one of the guys they hoped they would be able to get back. But no, the Panthers took their chance and got a very solid cornerback. The Panthers, as we talked about in the dispersal draft, were insanely good. Apologies for it saying 2023 XFL. A lot of these were made very, very, very soon after the picks were announced. So there's a couple typos. He was tied in 8th for passes defended this past season. But yeah, the Panthers got insanely great at the safety position in the dispersal draft, and now getting a guy like Nate Brooks helps shore up the cornerback room. The Panthers are very clearly trying to do what the Roughnecks did with the D-line, and that's get one part of the defense that's just unbelievably powerful in terms of just talent, quality, and all that. And he had 2 interceptions as well. Really solid addition. Then we have the other first-round quarterback, Jalen McClendon from the Vegas Vipers, going to the Defenders. This was a very, very big one. The Defenders are one of the teams that also needed a quarterback, and they got theirs in McClendon. The Defenders, Panthers, and Battlehawks now all sit at the same place where they're pretty much hoping that their quarterback comes back to them and doesn't stay in the NFL. And McClendon, well, he makes it to where they don't really need to get Te'amu. Te'amu is naturally an upgrade over McClendon, but McClendon, despite playing on a very terrible Vipers team, actually put up some really solid numbers in 4 games. Over 200 yards a game, 5 TDs to 1 pick, just under a 60 completion percentage. This is a really solid addition, especially since he had more rushing yards than Dormade did, and he only played in 4 games. I really like this ad, and I think that there's an argument to be made that the Brahmas should have gotten McClendon instead, but we'll see. Then we have Jared Scott, tight end, formerly of the Breakers. He didn't really get much time to actually show how good he was because of the fact this Breakers team had Sage Surratt, who was one of the best tight ends in spring football this past year. He's going to be a great help for the Renegades, helping them out in their run game and all that. I really like this pick. Solid one. Very underappreciated tight end because he didn't really get any opportunities to do much aside from being a blocker, so I like that. Then the Stallions drafted Larnell Coleman, offensive lineman. The Stallions, they came in with pretty much zero holes they really needed to fill, as the defenders pretty much only had quarterback to fill as well. So them and the Stallions were pretty much just drafting guys for either depth or just solid additions. Getting guys up front, always a great pick. Then we have the San Antonio Brahmas getting Trey Botts, defensive tackle. This one is one of the guys that we'll see. A lot of these guys also came from the XFL letter of intent signings or USFL free agent signings, so they haven't played in spring ball. But getting a defensive tackle is always a solid addition. Wade Phillips has wanted to clearly make this defense as good as it was with the Roughnecks. Solid pick. Then one of the ones that some people might be shocked at how high he went was Matt White going 10th overall to the Showboats. Let's be blunt, okay? He played on the Breakers. Of course he came here. Now, that being said, he was a very solid punter. He was a really good one. He had the fourth best punt average, while his in the 20 was a pretty bad seventh. His fourth in touchback percentage also not being great, but he had the second best net average at 37.8, which that's arguably the most important stat. How far are you consistently punting the ball? Really solid punter. What I wouldn't say he's in the top two, maybe top three punters, but a really solid addition to the Showboats, helping out their special teams. Then we have Chris Garrett, linebacker, going to the Battlehawks. He barely played this past season. He only appeared in a couple games, but this is a guy that has been in the NFL before. He's going to provide some help on the defense or some depth. We'll see what happens with him, but he got picked 11th overall for a reason. Just decent pick. Then we have Glenn Logan, another one that Ace was just like shocked at because, I mean, come on, it's another defensive lineman. Look, the Roughnecks, they're making their defensive line just this unbeatable unit to where guys who don't make the final roster probably are going to go start somewhere. Glenn Logan was a very solid player on a really good Roughnecks defense. He may have only had 1.5 sacks and 1 TFL, but when you have a bunch of other guys like they had, especially Trent Harris, when you think about it, this guy's going to be really good for the Roughnecks. Now, granted, when I say the Roughnecks, I mean the Roughnecks from the XFL. Now it's the Gambler Roughnecks. It is what it is. Then we have Will Adams going to the Michigan Panthers. Adams appeared in every single game for the Defenders. He was a guy that was a very solid safety to have, and again, it's another defensive back the Panthers drafted. They are trying to shore up that DB room and make it just as good as the Roughnecks defensive line. Then we have Chris Rowland going to the DC Defenders. He's one of those guys that, if I remember correctly, didn't really want to be drafted. He wanted to choose where he went, but he's going to a really solid place in the Defenders. He's been more of a depth receiver in terms of his receiving game, but he's a very solid one. 82 yards on 9 receptions and a TD. Dude is a really solid player to have. He's been great for Case Cookus with the Stars, and going to the Defenders is a really solid addition, especially since the Defenders naturally drafted a quarterback, so getting him some help out wide is a good one. Then we have Calvin Jackson going to the Renegades, receiver that hasn't been in spring football, but is a receiver, solid addition. Then we have Elijah Holder, safety, formerly of the Gamblers and the Dragons. He was with the Gamblers in 22 and then the Dragons this past year, where he had 25 tackles as a safety. Again, the Stallions really didn't have any notable weak spot outside of, well, really none of them. So this is a really solid addition to get to their back end, just to have another guy that could potentially be a starter. Solid pick. Then the first pick of the third round was B.J. Wilson. B.J. Wilson is an offensive tackle who's going to the Brahmas. Again, another offensive lineman to help out the Brahmas. The Brahmas, a lot of people think they had one of the best drafts, and you'll see later why it becomes so good, because this is a solid pick, but nothing insane. Then we have the Showboats getting Christian McFarland. This is a really solid one. The dude had 50 tackles with the Stallions this past year at safety. Again, another safety that the Stallions probably were going to draft back at some point. Really solid addition to the Showboats defense. The Showboats, I mean, DiFilippo played against the Stallions twice or 3 times this past year. He knows how good some of those players are. It's no shock that he drafted a couple Stallions to go with his Breakers. Then we have Luis Aguilar going 19th overall to the Roughnecks. This is a big one. Luis Aguilar legitimately is a two-way player for special teams. He is a kicker and a punter. Punter, he's solid. Kicking, he was incredible. He was the all-USL kicker this past year, though, as I've said before, it's debatably should have gotten it, because a large reason was because he had arguably the greatest game a kicker has had in any football game. Not just pro, but any football game, when he went 8 for 8, including a walk-off field goal to beat the Generals. He finished with the most field goals made, the most points by any kicker, though his accuracy in field goal was actually pretty low at 5th at 86%, and his extra point was 3rd, which was the 2nd best in the league if you count the fact that 2 guys had 100%. The fact is, he's a great kicker, and he's a punter as well, so he's the type of guy that, especially in a league that doesn't have as many roster spots as the NFL, as the active roster is like 42 or 45. He provides a massive boost in the fact that you don't have to bring a kicker and a punter, you just have to bring him. Then we have Cameron Kelly, safety from the Brahmas going to the Battlehawks. He was tied for seventh in interceptions this past year. A really solid safety. Again, another guy to help the back end out with the Battlehawks. Really like this pick. It's a solid one. You're getting a really solid safety to add. Good one. Then we have Eric Aboje going offensive tackle going back to Michigan. He only appeared in one game this past year, but again, he was a guy that was here this last year. So Mike Nolan and the GM decided to bring him back. Not really a shock. It shows they have a lot of faith in him. Good pick. Then TJ Barnes, formerly of the Renegades, going to the Defenders. This is a really solid pick. I like this one. You got a guy that got 2 sacks this past year with the Renegades, had 18 tackles, but most importantly, 5 TFLs, which is a really solid amount in 10 games. You're adding him to a defense that was pretty underrated in how good they drafted in the dispersal draft. The Defenders overall had the most underrated dispersal draft among all 8 teams. And a big reason for that was they really got a decent defensive line as well. And you're getting another guy to help out in the front, in the trenches back. That's a really solid one. I really like this pick. Then Nasir Greer for the Renegades, cornerback. This one is another somewhat questionable one. The Renegades, a lot of these picks early on are ones that I am about. But cornerback, solid position. We'll just see how it works out for them. And then Jalen Morton. This was the quarterback that some people might be shocked got picked, some might not. The fact is, he's a guy that's been on the Stallions this past year as one of their backups. Not shocked they brought him back. Granted, I do think that if Magoo does come back, he probably is the guy that gets cut. I'd imagine they'd keep Adrian Martinez as their third string over Morton, but we'll see. This also is a move that the Stallions naturally made that, it prevents somebody else from getting him in case they needed a quarterback and wanted him. So, solid pick for that reason. Then starting out the next round, we have Chris Steele, defensive back, going to the Brahmas. Solid DB to get, another guy that really hasn't done, spring football before, but again, Wade Phillips, as we talked about, did a ton of that in the dispersal draft, so I'm not surprised. Then Max Emilian Roberts. Really good player on the Vipers. 4 sacks, was just outside the top 10, 5 TFLs. This is a really good pickup going to the Showboats. This dude was a really solid player this past season with a very, very terrible Vipers team. So I really do like this pick. This is a great one. Then we go to Norman Price, a hybrid tackle guard going to the Roughnecks. He was in the Brahmas this past season, not the most, flashy of offensive teams, but again, another guy to help out in the trenches. Really solid pick. Then we have John Daka from the Houston Roughnecks, who had 4.5 sacks, which was tied for 9th going to the Battlehawks. Again, another really solid pick. An edge rusher that can help out. 6 TFLs is a really solid amount too. Going to help out that defense, going to short up. Really like this pick. This is a good one. Then we have Chidi Okiki, offensive tackle. Another guy that was on the Brahmas, now going to the Defenders. Defenders getting some guys in the trenches. Again, these are smart picks. They're not, the most, that's a really good skill position guy. You're getting solid guys that help out in the positions that matter, like this one. Then the one that as a Panthers fan, I'm kind of questioning. Cole Murphy, bringing him back. I hate to say it, but there's another pick that we'll see later that I'm the same way. Cole Murphy was a kicker that played in the USFL. That's the best way to describe him. I mean, no disrespect, but the fact is that when you're 78% on field goal percentage and 76.5 an extra point, it's kind of questionable. I feel like there are kickers that the Panthers could get that are better. Now, at the same time, I will admit there's a lot of guys you could get that are worse than Cole Murphy. He is a quintessential mid kicker. There are guys who are way better than him. And especially considering Coughlin was still on the board, not really a huge fan of it. Maybe there was some, talking between the Panthers and the Showboats to not draft Coughlin. But I feel like if you're going to draft a kicker, rather than get your guy back, get the guy that just was arguably the best kicker in the entire league. Then the 31st overall pick was BJ Bello, linebacker going to the Renegades. Solid player. I mean, guy has some experience in the NFL, a decent amount actually. Overall, I like this pick. Again, it's not one of the, flashiest picks for the Renegades, but it's a solid guy to get help on the defense. Then we have Terrell Bonds, who played on the Maulers and then the Brahmas. Solid cornerback. He was incredible year 1 with the Maulers, and then he was a really solid cornerback with the Brahmas this past season. This is a really solid one. You lose a guy like Nate Brooks, getting a guy like Terrell Bonds makes it not really feel like a big deal. Solid one. Then we have Darion Parker, offensive tackle, going to the Brahmas. Another pick that, is great for the trenches. It's a smart pick, not really a flashy pick. It is what it is. Then Lee Morris going to the Showboats. Here's another one of those former breakers. 339 receiving yards, a very, very, very forgettable wide receiver this past season, despite how good he actually was. Nobody really talked about Lee Morris, despite the fact that he was top 20 in receiving yards and had 3 receiving TDs. Really, really underappreciated, really solid player. This is a great ad for D. Filippo to bring back to the Showboats. And to make him a weapon of Cookus, oh man, it's going to be great. Then we have Logan Klussman, long snapper, going to the Roughnecks. A lot of people were joking when we were going to see long snappers taken, and he isn't even the last one we'll see. Like this pick. Then we have Abdul Beckham going offensive guard, formerly of the Guardians, going to the Battlehawks. Again, another O lineman. Gotta love it. Really solid pick. Another offensive lineman, Adonis Boone. Again, offensive line can't go wrong. We saw last year what happened with the Philadelphia Stars above any other team. What happens when you don't have a good O line? Solid pick. And then here's the other one that I'm really questioning. Kyle Kramer, really? We used back-to-back picks on our special teams guys to bring back, despite the fact that our special teams guy weren't really the best. Because when you look at his stats, the fact is you're 7th in punt average, you're 6th in net average, you're 6th in touchback percentage, you're 9th in 20%, or in the 20%, and you're 7th at I don't know. I'm not the biggest fan of this pick, but we'll see. Then we have Jawan Manigo, wide receiver of the Renegades. A guy that a lot of people are hyped up about, but again, another guy that we don't know for sure how good he's going to be in spring football. We'll see. Then Ryan Langan, really good pick. You're bringing back your long snapper to your team. There's no reason you shouldn't. Granted, they're going to have a new kicker this year, but I like this pick. Really solid one. Then we have KD Cannon, guy who only had 4 receptions this past year for the Guardians. So in theory, bad receiver, right? Well, guess what? Those 4 receptions in the 4 games he played were 40 yards receptions on average for 2 touchdowns because 3 of his receptions were 40 plus. You want a deep threat? You got yourself a deep threat. And the Showboats, Celesi Uatafe, another offensive lineman, formerly of the Breakers. No surprise there. John D. Filippo getting a bunch of his Breakers back. Nothing to be upset about. Really solid pick. Then the Houston Roughnecks get Gene Coleman, the second wide receiver out of Delaware. Another guy that we'll see how well he does with the Roughnecks. The Roughnecks did not draft a quarterback. They're currently just riding the Kenji Bahar train, which I'm actually a fan of. I know not a lot of people are, but I like it. We'll see what happens. Then we have Mandy Alonso, defensive tackle, going to the Battlehawks. Again, DT, solid position. Help out the defense of the Battlehawks. They had a really great offense this past season. The defense is what needs to be shored up a bit more. Like it. Then 45th overall, Michigan Panthers selected Vontrell McMillan. Really solid guy. They're bringing him back from this past season. Again, not the most flashy guy stat-wise, only 2 TFLs and 1.5 sacks. But again, you're bringing back a guy you had this past season, which is a big part of what the Super Draft was for. Bring the guys back you didn't protect, like this one. Then the DC defenders getting Puka Williams. As a receiver or a running back, he didn't really do a ton, but he was an outstanding returner for the defenders this past season, especially in the playoffs. He does have the whole arresting that happened a couple months ago, or about a month ago. But overall, as long as, he gets his act together and he stays here, he's going to be an awesome returner to have, like this pick. And now we're back to the Stallions because, yes, this is when the Arlington Renegades dropped out of the draft. And so the Stallions drafted Madre Harper. He's one of the guys they signed during the offseason. Talked about it before. He's had NFL experience. Again, another really solid cornerback to add to the team. Hasn't played spring football, but is a solid guy from what he should be. Then the Brahmas, Landon Akers, wide receiver. Another one of those underappreciated guys, just like Lee was, that we talked about earlier. 30 receptions with 300 yards on the Roughnecks with 420-plus yard receptions. That's a really solid amount. He didn't have any TDs, so he wouldn't, show up on the score sheet. But dude was a really solid player. Again, Wade Phillips is the coach here. He brought A.J. Smith, his OC, with him. No surprise they're bringing back one of their best wide receivers. Then how about Will Likely going to the Showboats? This is a good one. Will Likely was awesome for the Gamblers in year 1. All USFL player in 2022. While he wasn't as dominant with the Roughnecks this past season. He was still a really solid guy. Just pretty much like we talked about, like Bryce Tornaden. Still a really good player in year two, just not as good as they were in year one. Did have half a sack, did have a TFL, 29 tackles. Really solid ad for the Showboats. Then we have Khalil McKenzie for the Battlehawks, as at this point the Roughnecks had dropped out of the draft. McKenzie, offensive lineman from the Vipers. Yikes, but again, offensive lineman, really solid. Like this pick for the Battlehawks. Then we go to the DC Defenders because also the Michigan Panthers dropped out of the draft at this round. They drafted Nader Rose, cornerback from the Defenders. Again, just like the Stallions with a lot of them, this is the point where the Defenders brought back a bunch of their guys. Not much to say. He played on the team. He's back. Then the Birmingham Stallions selected Bo Scarborough. Look, we all know the story with him. Incredible in the very, very limited amount of games he played in year one since he signed midway through the season. Expected to be an unbelievably great running back in year two. Got hurt week one and missed the whole season. He's back. This is the kind of pick that makes you think there's some, talk between the coaches about who not to draft and stuff, because Bo Scarborough going this late is a pretty big surprise. He's an Alabama guy. It's going to be great for them if he's back and healthy. Then the Brahmas selected A.J. Hendy, defensive back for the Roughnecks. Another guy from the Roughnecks, 36 tackles at TFL. And we're starting to see these Brahma picks that I talked about that made their draft look really good. Solid pick, good one. Then the Memphis Showboats got Damian Willis, wide receiver from the Dragons, who had 120 yards and a TD this past season. Really solid receiver. They've drafted a lot of receivers with the dispersal draft in this one. Either guys back from the Breakers, guys from the Stars, or just good players, or mainly guys from the Breakers and other teams to help out with Case Cookus. Really solid pick. Then the Battlehawks get another O-lineman, Christian Olmstead. Again, always got to love getting the boys up front, a guy that played for you. Solid pick. Then the DC Defenders got C.J. Johnson, wide receiver. We'll see how good he does here. A wide receiver pick here makes sense. You drafted a quarterback, get him some weapons, solid pick. And then we have the Stallions selecting Jameer Ross Johnson, offensive tackle who played for them. Again, a guy that's played for you. Nothing really to say. Solid pick. Then the Brahmas got John Yarbrough. He's been a starting offensive lineman for the past 2 years, both in Houston, once with the Gamblers, once with the Roughnecks. Now he's back with Wade Phillips. Again, really solid pick. Help the trenches out. Good pick. Then Turner Bernard, long snapper, the same exact thing. Dude played for the Breakers under DeFilippo. Bring him back to the Showboats, especially because of a guy they pick later, which helps out. Solid pick. Yeah, how did Boogie fall this far? Boogie fell to pick 60 in the draft. This is one of the last 15 picks the Defenders got in unbelievable talent. Look, Boogie, above all else, is great for your team in a media sense, in a team relations sense, in a, fan sense. This guy is great with the fans. He's a very popular player. Dude was tied for fourth in TFLs. He's a great defensive tackle. He's among that, just under the top couple guys. He is a top 5 DT in the USFL this past year and is without a doubt a top 10 DT in the league. And the fact they got him at pick 60 is an insane steal. This is the best pick in the entire draft because of how late they got him. Then we have Zaquandre White from the Stallions. Played this past year, only had one fumble, had 2 TDs, 128 yards on a really solid 4.4 yards per rush. But nobody really talks about him because they had CJ Marable this past season who went off. But again, another Stallion to bring back, good pick. Then the Brahmas got Cody Crest, wide receiver. See how he does. Again, another wide receiver. You drafted a quarterback. Like to talk about the Defenders. Can't go wrong. Then the Showboats, Ty Smith from the Guardians, 25 total tackles. Another cornerback to add to the back end. Really solid pick. Then Anthony Hines, linebacker, had 33 tackles, 3 TFLs, and a sack for the Defenders this past season, is now back. Then the Stallions getting Bobby Holly, fullback from the Birmingham Stallions. Again, another guy to bring back, solid. And now the Brahmas are out of the draft, and the Showboats got Matt Conklin. This is the other one I'd argue is as good as Boogie Roberts in a different way. I said it before, he should have been the all-USFL kicker. Either him or Aubrey. The fact is, the dude went 25 of 25 in extra points, and he went 18 of 19 on field goals, which did include a really good 5-for-5 game early in the season. Finished 4th in field goals made, 1st in field goal percentage, 2nd in extra points made, and tied for 1st in extra points percentage. Note number one in extra point made was Aubrey, who went 35 of 35. But yeah, Conklin was unbelievable. He was the second best kicker behind Aubrey in all of spring football, if you want to be honest. This is insane that they got him this late. Panthers should have drafted him. Roughnecks arguably should have drafted him. Showboats got their kicker back, who, again, was with the Breakers and has his long snapper again. Then Tobias Taylor, running back, going to the Defenders. I like this pick. It's a solid one. Get a depth running back. Just nothing much to say. Myron Mitchell, wide receiver for the Stallions. Another guy that is coming back home to Birmingham. Had 15 receptions for 138 yards this past season and a TD. Solid pick. Then 69, we have Antoine Brooks, cornerback. Played on the Dragons, 3 TFLs, a sack and a half, and 44 tackles. This is a DB that can actually rush the passer. He'd be great for some defensive schemes, and from what I remember, Connor Lake is still here, so he's going to really make him a really great player on this defense. Love this pick. Then the DC Defenders, Enrique Yenny Romero. He's a guy that they ended up actually having a letter of intent signing with during the offseason. He has not played really in America. He's more of a Spanish guy, like in Mexico kicker. We'll see how well he does, but again, drafting a kicker, not really a bad idea. Kicking is a very important position in the USF or in the UFL. Good one. The Stallions are out, and now we are going to the Showboats, who get Michael Stevens, cornerback who played for the New Orleans Breakers. 25 tackles, solid cornerback. Again, another guy from the Breakers. And then the last pick of the draft, as the Defenders were out, were the Showboats getting Willie Henry, defensive tackle. 3.5 sacks, very underrated defensive tackle this past season for the Stallions. 3 TFLs, 20 tackles. Really like this one. So that'll do it. That is the complete recap. All 72 picks of the UFL Super Draft. Again, if you made it through this whole video, make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell notification to be notified as soon as I upload any videos. I have at least 2 videos that I have planned to come out this week in the next couple days, but there's going to be more probably. Power Rankings video, the first one, will be coming out within the next few days, as well as I do have a video about the teams that got shelved and another video that is a top 5 video in regards to the UFL shop. So I have a lot coming out. If I were to give a quick summary on what I think the teams that best did the draft, I think the Brahmas draft is overrated. I think it was a solid draft, but I don't think it was the best by a country mile like a lot of people like to say it is. I think the Defenders, once again, are going to come out of this with a very underrated draft. I think the Roughnecks did really solid despite a couple of questionable picks. The Battlehawks, honestly, I think their dispersal draft is overrated. I think the Super Draft is probably going to be underrated. And then the Showboats, I think the Showboats arguably had the best Super Draft as well. They got positions they needed. They got guys back from the Breakers that were really good. The Showboats, by far, have done the best from going from what they were when the merger first happened to after the 2 drafts. Panthers, heavily disappointing. Very upset with this after their great dispersal draft. That will have an impact in Power Rankings, which will come out, again, probably later this week. As always, guys, have a great night.